Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. I hope you have all been enjoying yourselves. Now, today I would like to talk about something which has been bothering me for quite a long time, which is the way that geniuses think, the kind of people that geniuses are. Geniuses are not like us. They don't think in a normal way. They think in a very specific and different way. And so that is the nature of genius. And look at the gorilla. Look at the little gorilla. Look at the gorilla. Can you see the gorilla? Can you see the gorilla? Look at the gorilla. Look at the gorilla. Right, that's the gorilla. The gorilla is going to become highly germane to what I want to talk about today, which is this notion of different kinds of thinking and the way in which the genius thinks differently from ordinary people. Now, there's a very interesting book which has been drawn to, my attention has been drawn to it by our great supporter, who is, of course, the eldest son of a knight or younger son of a peer of the realm, the Squire. And this is on this book is called Think Fast, Think Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which was published in 2011. It is an award-winning book, and the person has won various prizes and whatever. He's quite an eminent individual. And what he basically argues, and this is, I think, absolutely vital to understanding genius, is that there are two fundamental kinds of thinking, what he calls System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is instinctive and emotional. It is the kind of thinking that you would associate with, perhaps with art, but also it's the kind of thinking that you would associate with a person who basically wasn't very intelligent, a person who acted on impulse, a person that just acted on their emotions, on their inbuilt biases, on their instincts towards things. These are instincts that you dislike loss more, that you fear of loss is one particular instinct that we have, so we'll act according to that, or confirmation bias, where we look for examples of something rather than looking for counter examples or whatever. There's all kinds of these instincts, and so if you act on these instincts, then you will make mistakes and you will be confronted with cognitive problems which you won't solve unless you are a System 2 kind of a person. This is the opposite of System 1. This is slow, deliberative, logical, and in a sense low in instinct. It is uninstinctive. So he highlights these two opposite kinds of thinking. Now, to go into more detail, he suggests that the first kind of thinking, you're good at things like judging the distance of objects, you're good at judging the source of a sound. If someone says war and, you will be good at finishing the sentence. You will quickly feel disgust towards an unpleasant image. You will be able to know simple sums very quickly without really thinking about them. You will be able to read the text on a billboard without really thinking about it. You'll be able to drive a car on an empty road. If you're good at chess, you'll be able to instinctively know the right chess move. You'll be able to complete simple sentences, and you'll be able to associate a certain kind of person with a certain kind of job. So if you were to say to somebody, John is very, very tidy and neat, is he a librarian or is he an artist? Then you will automatically go for librarian. It will be an instinctive response. The Type 2 thinking is rather different. Such a person will be able to brace themselves for the start of a race, and so sort of get into the mode, as it were. They will be able to, if told to spot a clown at a circus, so they'll be good at doing a kind of Where's Wally thing, where they spot a small detail. They will be good at finding the source, at finding an individual at a loud party where there's lots of people. So again, good at trying to find details, calmly focusing on details, woman with grey hair, whatever. They will be able to correctly judge the appropriate behaviour to engage in a social setting, and they will do so by reasoning out what's going on in that social setting. And they will be able to park a motor car in a tight space, assuming they can drive. So these are the two fundamental ways of thinking. And obviously, the second way of thinking is the way of thinking that you would regard as intelligent, the way of thinking that you would regard as the genius. What is the genius? The genius is a person who has very high outlier, high IQ, and consequently that person can come up with amazing problems to solutions to intractable problems, and therefore solve the problem. And you would assume that the genius engages in this second form of thinking only, that he's a deliberator, that he's calm and logically approaches the problem. Now, I think that makes sense. You would think that, but it doesn't seem to be the case. And that's not what genius is about. And I look at this in my book, The Genius Famine, by myself and my colleague Bruce Charlton. That's not the case. The genius is actually a highly intuitive thinker. And it is this kind of thinking which allows you better to solve problems. And I think that's why Kahneman is wrong about that. Not the kind of everyday quotidian mathematical or whatever type problems that he talks about. Fine, that's associated with this type 2 thinking. But original thinking, where you can really make a breakthrough, not just base your thinking on stuff that you've learned in the past and think very carefully accordingly, of the kind that would get you a good mark in a school exam or in your degree or whatever, but really original breakthrough thinking. And this doesn't appear to work like that. Now, think about what it would be like. If you think too fast, then you are simply impulsive. You simply react. You simply assume that you know the answer. You are overconfident because you assume you know the answer, and you will make mistakes, and you won't do well in IQ tests, and you won't do well in exams, and you won't be a particularly cognitively rigorous kind of person. That's type that you won't get very far if you're highly instinctive. You'll be like a dog. You won't be able to focus on things. You'll be constantly reacting, and therefore you'll be unable to solve complex problems because it involves a certain degree of cognitive isolation to be able to focus on the problem and really sort of burrow down and like deep into it and really kind of get to the root of the problem. Now, what if you think too slowly? Well, what will be the consequences of thinking too slowly? Well, there are two consequences that occur to me. The first is simply that you won't be confident enough. So you will think in a great deal of depth about the problem, and you will think about all of the possibilities or whatever, and all of the and you will lack confidence. You will lack the confidence to come to a certain conclusion. And of course, that's not what geniuses do. Geniuses tend to come to a conclusion, and they have the confidence to go public and state, "This is my conclusion." And often, if they come up with an original idea, it will inherently offend against a vested interest. This is the nature of any original idea, that it will move things on, and so it will offend against vested interests. And the genius either doesn't care that he offends against vested interests, or he's too kind of autistic, basically. He's too low in empathy, too low in social skill to understand that he is offending against vested interests, even if he does care. And so consequently, the genius has a certain degree of confidence, and he's prepared to come up with and present this original idea. So if you lack, he's instinctively confident. He feels in himself that he knows the answer, and he's prepared to go public with it. This is an intuitive issue. And so this is the difference between the genius and the kind of bog standard scientist, who will, I'm sure, be very, very thoughtful and think in all these kinds of logical ways. But in a sense, he can't see the wood for the trees. And secondly, if we move on to not seeing the wood for the trees, the gorilla is an example of this. There's a very interesting experiment which is discussed in the book I mentioned earlier, whereby people are told to watch a basketball match, and there's a team that are dressed in white versus a team that are dressed in black, and they have to concentrate on and remember how many goals, or whatever you call them in basketball, one of the particular team's scores. And so that's what they do. They watch the video and they focus on that. And then what happens in the experiment is that somebody dressed as a gorilla comes onto the screen, stands in the middle of the screen, bashes their chest like this, is on screen for about 7 seconds or something, and then leaves. And what was found was that some substantial percentage, at least half of people, don't notice the gorilla. They don't notice the gorilla. Why do they not notice? They say it never happened. There was no gorilla. And then they're shown the video again, and they're told not to concentrate on these basketballs or whatever, and then of course they do see the gorilla. Now, why is that? Well, because they're thinking slowly, and part of thinking slowly involves utterly absorbing yourself in the puzzle in question, and therefore focusing entirely on it, and therefore ignoring and blotting out extraneous information which would prevent you from focusing on the matter in hand. And consequently, they don't see the gorilla. Now, what's interesting about people I know who perhaps we would say they are rather genius in what they're like, is they do see the gorilla. They can't blot out the gorilla. The gorilla's there. Yes, they can concentrate intensely, very, very intensely, and focus on problems and solve them in a very cerebral way. But they do see the gorilla, i.e. they see everything. They can't blot out information. They can't focus on one tiny thing, which is what incrementalist scientists do. They focus on their one tiny thing, and they don't see the bigger picture. Whereas what a genius does is he sees the bigger picture. And this, I would suggest, is because he is combining the two types of thinking. He has aspects of type 1 thinking. He has aspects of type 2 thinking. Similarly, what you will find with these incrementalist scientists is that to the extent that they come up with theories, they will often be these overcomplicated theories that don't pass the test of parsimony, that are too complicated or whatever. Whereas again, and this is possibly partly because they lack a certain degree of confidence in themselves. They lack an intuitive feeling that they're definitely right and they've got it. And they've cracked it because they're always focused on this type 2 thinking, which is all about slow deliberation and not being certain and whatever. Whereas the genius is not like that. The genius is certain, instinctively certain. He has almost a messianic mission towards the truth. And he is so intelligent that he works things out, but he has a personality that says, yes, I've worked it out and I'm sure that I am right. And so you'll get these people that will say, oh, people that are geniuses that I've met, oh, they're very humble. Well, they haven't met any geniuses. Geniuses aren't humble. We know the kind of people that are geniuses. James Watson would be a kind of a modern genius. Francis Crick. These people weren't humble at all. These people were often rather arrogant, actually. So we know from detailed studies that have been done on the kind of people that are geniuses that they combine outlier high IQ. Normally, scientists combine high IQ with being high in conscientiousness and high in agreeableness. What the conscientiousness means is they are rule-following, they have high impulse control, i.e. militates in favour of this slow kind of thinking. They're not impulsive. Agreeableness means they're cooperative, they're able to take criticism, they're able to listen to criticism of their ideas, and so they get better and whatever. And so this makes them better scientists. The genius is different. The genius is outlier high IQ, mega high IQ, much higher IQ than the incrementalist scientist, combined with moderately low agreeableness and moderately low conscientiousness. This means, as I said, that he doesn't care about offending people or whatever, and so therefore he's happy to present his original idea, no matter how offensive against vested interests it is. But also in terms of conscientiousness, it means that he thinks outside the box. It means that he's creative. It means that he has ideas. He has instincts almost. He has sort of gut instincts, and he goes with them and he tests them and whatever. There's a strong emotional dimension to how he thinks, a creative dimension, an intuitive dimension. And that's what type 1 thinking is about. Type 1 thinking is intuitive. And the genius will tend to be highly intuitive. He will come up with these intuitions and he will these possibilities that will just come to him almost in a kind of reverie, and he will test them. And the third aspect, and it crosses over with the agreeableness aspect because empathy, as we mentioned earlier, is autism. Now, there's very good evidence that shows that once you get to outlier high IQ, people that have outlier high IQ, like geniuses, have elements of autism. Now, what is autism? Autism is a number of traits that come together. It's basically identified by basically a lack of empathy, that you don't understand the feelings of others, that you can't read people's feelings from external states, that you're not interested in their feelings. But essentially it's been put by Simon Baron-Cohen on a kind of scale. With at the one end you have empathy, that you're very empathetic and that's what you're interested in, and at the other end you have autism. You have systematizing. And systematizing, which could be argued, of course, to be a type 2 issue, systematizing, logically and coldly systematizing, this is the extreme of autism. You are very, very high in systematizing, but you are very low in empathy. But there are other dimensions to autism as well, and these also are associated. So obviously, if you're high in systematizing, you're going to have high intelligence because you're better at solving problems, you're going to do better on IQ tests. But there are other dimensions to autism that are relevant as well. And one of these is overstimulation. So people that are autistic are very, very sensitive to noise, they're very, very sensitive to smell, they're hypersensitive. How does that help you solve problems? Well, obviously, the more information you can take in, the more information about the world you can imbibe, the subtler is your understanding of the world, the more you know. And the more you know, the more subtle is your understanding of the world, the more able you are to work out what's really going on, to fit everything together into the big picture and solve the problem. So this is this fundamental issue. On the one hand, yes, it is good to solve a problem, to be able to utterly focus on the one thing and blot everything else out that's irrelevant. But on the other hand, if you can't blot everything else out, if you are autistic and you are incapable of blocking out noise, you are incapable of blocking out extraneous stuff, then you may perceive things and perceive their relevance, which if you were one of these type 2 thinkers, you simply wouldn't perceive. there'll be these things that'll be there that the type 2 thinker will assume are irrelevant, and he'll focus in on the problem. You will perceive these things, and you may realise how they relate to the problem. And consequently, you would expect people that have very, very high IQ to be high in aspects of autism, precisely because the IQ is testing your ability to solve problems, and you will be better able to solve the problem. Ironically, yes, you've got to focus, but also the more information you can take in. That helps you to solve the problem. If you want to solve a problem, for example, of how to build a waterproof roof, you will notice, if you take more information in, a subtle difference between this material, and you'll go for the better material. Whereas a person that wasn't able to take as much information wouldn't notice this. So you have this difference whereby, on the one hand, a person who is a normal type 2 thinker can notice of course they notice little details. If you tell them to find the grey-haired woman in the crowd, they will find the grey-haired woman in the crowd, and they will remove everything else. Whereas the person who is highly intelligent and high in autism will also be able to find the grey-haired woman in the crowd, but he will also notice other things that are happening in the crowd, and which the person looking for the grey-haired woman will not notice, because he will zoom in on the grey-haired woman, and consequently he may notice something which the person focusing on the grey-haired woman wouldn't notice, such that there's a terrorist in the crowd with a bomb, or whatever. And he wouldn't notice it. So therefore, the person that can see the bigger picture on the one hand, a person who's autistic will be focusing on details and whatever, but on the other hand, there's an element to which being high in this autism trait allows you to better perceive the bigger picture, and allows you therefore to solve problems. And so this is why we would expect the person who is the genius to be about to balance, to have a sort of balancing act between type 1 and type 2 thinking. And this appears to be the case, and as evidenced in their relatively low conscientiousness, and as evidenced in the fact that they have these aspects of autism. There would be this balance. Now, this raises a question about life history strategy. We've looked a lot on this channel before at life history strategy. This is the idea, as I've said, that we're all on a scale between fast life history strategy that is adapted to an unstable yet plentiful environment, therefore you live fast and die young because you could be wiped out at any second, moving along to a slow life history strategy, which is that you're adapted to an environment that is stable yet harsh, which means that you therefore compete with other members of your environment, and therefore you have to be highly cooperative, and you develop these cooperative groups, and you invest more energy in nurture of your offspring than simply in having lots of offspring in the hope that some survive. And so you get this distinction between R, which is the fast life history, and K, which is the slow life history. Now, what is the genius? Well, the genius has been suggested to be group selected, i.e. two groups that are in conflict. If one of them has more per capita geniuses, then those geniuses will come up with solutions to problems to help you win the conflict, such as better weapons or whatever. And so therefore, one of the reasons why geniuses, despite being antisocial, and therefore are strategists, antisocial people that just live fast, die young, and are impulsive, stay in the population, is because they combine these different traits. They combine elements of what we would say a K strategy, such as extremely high intelligence, such as focused kind of thinking and whatever, with elements of an R strategy, such as being uncooperative, such as being low in agreeableness, such as being low in empathy, and this creates the perfect fusion to allow them to solve amazing problems. And this is good for the group because they can solve these problems, they can come up with new weapons or whatever. And therefore the genius is this combination of the two. As individuals as well, if you look at the kind of people that are geniuses, people like Einstein, people like Newton or whatever, but you can't just say they're a highly intelligent R strategist. It's more complicated than that. They have elements of both. They have aspects of both dimensions, and it's this perfect mixture that makes the genius. And so I think that our friend Mr. Kahneman is not only has a lot of his research, or some of his research anyway, been subject to the replication crisis, which has been going on in psychology. So some of his experiments haven't actually borne out. But I think more importantly, it has to be understood that this distinction between a fast thinker and a slow thinker is not quite right when it comes to people that are extremely good at thinking indeed. Because when you're extremely good at thinking indeed, then you combine aspects of fast and slow thinking. In the same way, by the way, that if you are extremely K strategy, then there's some evidence that you combine aspects of both, because you are evolved to a particularly narrow niche But once that happens, then the positive relationship between these different components of K strategy, such as agreeableness, intelligence, and conscientiousness, and age, usual virginity, and puberty age, and whatever, these kind of break up, so that you can create the optimum niche, the just right niche, which can mean that people that are highly K strategists can actually be more R strategists on some individual measures, because that is the niche that they have found themselves in a context in which everybody in a K strategy they can't all do the same thing. They all have to find very specific niches. And so perhaps that's what's going on with the genius. The genius has a very specific niche, and that niche involves the optimum balance as you become very intelligent between aspects of the type 2 intelligence, which is the essence of intelligence really, and aspects of type 1. It's very and much the same way that as you get more intelligent, there is evidence that intelligence itself breaks up. So we have different kinds of intelligence: verbal, linguistic, verbal, mathematical, and spatial, and you have different things that are below that are very narrow, like the ability to drive a car, the ability to do up your shoelaces, whatever. And you find that as people become more intelligent, then the positive manifold between the different aspects of intelligence breaks up, such that they have huge overall intelligence, but the things that are weakly associated with intelligence, like driving a car, they can't do. Because they're only weakly associated with intelligence. And that's very interesting that what Kahneman says, that one of the things that's a sign of being a slow thinker is that you can park a car successfully in a complex space. Well, a lot of people I know who are very intelligent can't drive cars. A.J. Ayer couldn't drive a car. Einstein couldn't drive a car. So I think what we can build upon him by saying is that the genius is this optimum balance between the two kinds of thinking. And it is that real problem solving comes from this balance between type 1 and type 2, between contemplative sort of thinking and intuitive thinking. That is where genius comes from. And I'm going to develop this in my next video by talking about the midwit, i.e. the absolute opposite of the genius. But of course, so many of you who watch my show will notice the gorilla. Okay, I hope this has been of interest. I will see you soon. Remember that we live stream on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York. If you would like to assist the channel, you can see ways of doing so below. And goodbye!